Okay, welcome everyone to the 138th meeting for Systems Thinking Ontario. Today is Monday, January 12th, 2026. So it's the first session of the new year. Thank you for everyone for logging on, and I'm sure more will join, and that's okay. Last year we did quite a few in person, so I hope once in a while we switch to online. I'm going to take it's cold outside excuse on this one. And I'm sure others, Rose and others, are happy to join from afar, which is always great. So in this session, we thought to do something a little bit more different, less on a specific deep dive on the topic, more just generally chatting about some of the foresight conferences and workshops that occurred last year. And so we'll do a little bit of a share back. We'll hear from people who attended the workshops. And that way, if you didn't get a chance to attend, or if you only heard about it, or you want to learn more, we can hear from their experiences. We can ask questions. It's going to be pretty casual and organic, nothing too kind of formal. If you want to like share screen and show anything that you have from your visits, that's fine. If not, that's fine as well. So in typical Systems Thinking Ontario fashion, what we typically do is we just kind of introduce ourselves. We just go around the room, our virtual room, and kind of just say, what's our name? Where we're calling in from and what brought us here tonight. So I'll just go through the grid. And on this one, you can mention if you attended any of the three events or conferences. That way, I'll just have a mental note of who did. So we'll start. I'll just go through the grid. Start with Petri.
Hey, I'm Petri, former SFI student, futurist, AI guide designer. I did not attend any of the meetings. I'm here to catch up on the state of the futures.
Awesome. Thank you for joining, Petri. Danang.
I'm like Petri. I'm just here as a interested casual observer.
Cool. Rose.
Hi, I'm in Ottawa. I haven't attended anything. I'm in here in person, so it's been a while. The subject interests me, about the future, and so I'm curious to learn from everybody.
Awesome. Next up, Sebastian.
Hi, I'm joining from Campbell River, BC. I'm an SFI student. I was there a while ago, and I did not attend any of these workshops. I'm just curious on the topic, and happy to reconnect with everyone in Toronto and stuff.
Awesome. Nice to see you, Sebastian. Thanks for joining. Anna.
I did not know that this is how it's going to go. Hi, I'm Hannah. I am currently in Toronto, Ontario. I am, among many things, an FSFI student. I guess I'm an AP of Ontario co-lead with Suze and a founder of the Canadian Foresight Network. I went to the DFF, which is the forum in November, and I was at Real's I don't know what we'll call it. Let's call it the workshop/session in Ottawa.
Okay, awesome. So Anna will be one of the folks that we'll be hearing about from her experiences. Zayon.
Hi, I'm Zayon. I'm here from Toronto, and I was at DFF, but mainly here to hang out.
Awesome. Roberto.
Hey, I went to Dubai Future Forum, so I was at DFF and I was also at the Jailbreak session as well. So I can speak about that. Yeah, definitely. Play some music, Zayon. 100%. I see that, Anna. But I'm also an SFI student right now, doing my MRP research. And yeah, I love the systems community, so I'm always so here to listen to everybody else's experience.
Awesome. Thanks, Roberto. Looking forward to hearing your share back shortly. Elena Leonard.
Hi, I'm I'm here in Toronto. I didn't attend those. Although I did attend the RSD.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks, Elena. Roxana.
Hi, Roxana. I'm calling from Oakville. I'm also an SFI student, and yeah, I haven't attended any of the events, so I'm really curious to hear what people's experiences were.
Thank you for joining. Aileen.
Hi, I'm a current SFI student along with Anna, part of the first ever online part-time cohort. So we're very used to like having lots of quality time over a computer screen. And I was in the jailbreaking workshop, and Roberto and I were in the same group for that.
Oh, awesome. Okay, so looking forward to hearing from you as well. Marcon.
Hi, my name is Markan. I'm also an SFI student. Roberto and I are in the same cohort, and I got a chance to be at DFF as an attendant and also as one of the panelists. So yeah, I'm looking forward to sharing more about that. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for joining. Looking forward to hearing about that. Heather?
Hi, I'm Heather Galbraith. I work with the City of Calgary as a foresight practitioner, urban planner, and strategist, and attended DFF the prior 2 years, but not this year. I only got to go to the death dance party, and well, that was just highly worth it. So that was all good.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks for joining from Calgary. I'll move on to some of the other folks. If you're away from the computer, if you can't join, that's okay. But if you can introduce yourself, just say where you're calling in from and what brings you here tonight. That'd be great. Arij?
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Arij. I'm a design thinker and a spatial researcher, and I'm joining in from Saudi Arabia. This is my first time, and I'm quite excited.
Oh, thank you, Arij. Thanks for joining. Bridget?
Hi, everyone. My name's Bridget. I'm calling in from New Haven, Connecticut. I'm not sure how I got linked with this group, but I'm thinking it's because I'm really curious about Dubai Futures Forum, so I'm excited to hear about that from everyone.
Awesome. Thanks for joining. Alex?
Yeah, so hopefully you can hear me and perhaps see me. So my connectivity is not that good today, but I'm calling from Montreal, and actually I've met Anna, and I haven't not been to Dubai for. I wish I could have been there, and I've been working with Foresight for 1 year, well, some time now, and interested to hear about all the sharing here, and so that's why I'm here. Nice to meet you all.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for joining. And last but not least, Albert.
Hi, sorry, I'm currently in transit, so I'm going to connect on the camera in a few minutes. I just posted a message to introduce myself. I'm based in Montreal, and I've been practicing foresight for 6 years. I used to run the chapter of Speculative Future Montreal for a couple of years, and I didn't attend the previous event. Just joining in a few minutes. Sorry. And yes, I also had the opportunity to meet with Riel a few weeks ago. He came to Montreal, and I had the chance to interview him. And I just published an article with Compass, which will be released in a couple of weeks, about his experience.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, once you get settled, looking forward to you also sharing a little bit about your experiences with Riel in the workshop and part of the discussion. So thank you and welcome. Okay, so we'll go through 3 of these conferences, not necessarily in any chronological order. I think we'll start with Dubai Futures Forum, because that's the one that a lot of people have attended, and there's kind of some enthusiasm to hear about that. So just really quickly or really briefly, I'll literally just share like my tab for a second, then we'll come back. Dubai Future Foundation is an organization located in Dubai, as presented in the name. Each year, around the November-ish time, they have a forum on the Futures Forum with a number of different themes. So the 2025 edition had these couple of themes. If I scroll below, it's like World's Largest Gathering of Futurists, 2025 theme, Exploring the Unknown, Empowered Society, Reimagining Health, Optimizing Systems, hey, relevant, and Foresight Insights as well. And so it's a bunch of featured speakers, and they have a bunch of videos you can walk through. You can check out their playlists if you want to have the time to spend. Some of the folks here were also on that as well. So to kick us off, I'm going to throw it to, yeah, actually, I don't know who to go, but like Marcon, Anna, Roberto, Zayon, you 4 were there, right? Aileen as well? No, not Aileen. Okay. So Anna, why don't you maybe just kick us off? And then Roberto, Marco, and Zayan, you can almost like organically build on the kickoff. Like what would you add to your reflection?
Uh,
Anna, give us a doorway into this world, Anna.
I was gonna say maybe we should have started with actually the first timers, because I think there are a couple of people who were there for the first time, and I'd be curious to hear their sort of point of view before I layer over mine.
Okay.
But if you want me to, I can start. But I think it might be actually interesting to hear for people who they're there for the first time.
Sure. Why don't we do that? That's a good idea. So is that Roberto and Marcon? Is that you two?
Yeah, it was my first time, but Marco, you were on the panel. Do you want to start? I know we're being very Canadian right now.
Okay, I'll
Marcon?
just start
Okay,
for the sake of
start.
starting. It was my first time. It was really nice to be in a space where I didn't have to explain what foresight is. That's how I would like to say. I think for me, it was really interesting to see that how different parts of the world have been looking into foresight as a practice. It was interesting that I personally feel like there was lesser of a North American presence as compared to other parts of the world. And one thing that really interested me is that how there were literally school and college students from Dubai attending the conference. So it has been really put into their brains since, early on. For me, I was part of the panel where we were talking about how what different generations think about the practice of foresight. So it was really interesting to see how like there was one person who has just started teaching in a university, the other person who has been teaching for a while, and then me and a few other people. And the whole idea was that right now, when you're teaching foresight, there is this negative image about future because of all that's happening. And in that scenario, how do you teach students, or how do you let them be hopeful while you are looking into what foresight is really showing you? There were also a few things like, for example, the constant thing about like how you need to be more inclusive and you need to bring communities into this. It's not about just doing it for them, but with them. That concept of co-designing futures with them has been something that was constantly being brought up in different sessions throughout. And overall, I felt like, I mean, I can jump in again as others start, but I feel like from I mean, for me, it was also very interesting that a lot of African countries been doing great work in this area, and which is something I feel like is very inspiring to see, because it's always sometimes foresight is considered to be a tool that is used by people who have a lot of resources, but a lot of times it could be to manage whatever you have. So I think it was very interesting to see different parts of the world coming together to, bring this practice forward. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, Roberto, you want to build on that as a first time attendant?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Marco really hit the nail on the head with the themes of co-design, which was really interesting. And I loved your panel on intergenerational fairness, but there's a lot of unknown and a lot of uncertainty, and it was interesting to see what was there and what wasn't there. And specifically, what I noticed is foresight, and I'll just speak for this. It's like foresight, anticipation. There's a tension there between what I would call probabilistic versus almost reductive, like truth finding. Like we have to find empirical truth, or that is a possibility to find empirical truth versus more of an acceptance of uncertainty. And that was a really interesting, like, sort of theme and tension throughout the entire conference that I noticed. One of the interesting things that I noticed as well is everyone was talking about systems thinking, but there was very little actual how. It was almost like a competitive advantage for people to not say how they were implementing systems thinking, which I found very, very interesting and enlightening and kind of funny. But what was interesting is to see how foresight is right now, at least, and anticipation. Both are being utilized in the corporate sphere and in the political, in more of like the public sphere, but being tested in terms of where it fits best. We had several different organizations, well, many different organizations, but in one particular panel, it was about how do you increase like foresight readiness within an organization, but also how do you demonstrate your value as a foresight person and as a systems person within an organization. And it was interesting to note that of the three, and these are big multinational conglomerate companies, the function of foresight was somewhere different. It was not, was it with AXA? No, Anna, I went to the one with IKEA and Pepsi, if you remember that one, and Shell, and they were speaking. So that was just super interesting. And then there was another interesting panel about how different, specifically how different schools, international schools, speak and talk about and integrate foresight into their larger programs. So yeah, some really interesting takes. But me as a first timer, it was really interesting to see the tension between more of like an empirical foresight versus more of a co-design, like let's not necessarily have experts, but let's build something beautiful together.
Okay.
Persuasion.
So Roberto, just to clarify, the empirical one that you were describing, the quantitative one, is more foresight, and the dealing with uncertainty one is more anticipation.
Ish.
Okay.
But it's not. How do I put that? Honestly, Zaid, the interesting thing is both exist in both disciplines.
Okay.
It's under the umbrella, for sure. Under the umbrella of futures, you have people trying to quantify foresight methods, and you have people trying to quantify anticipatory methods into like AI-driven models, perhaps, or trend-driven models. You have people searching for what metrics might we judge foresight and anticipation on. So trying to quantify what they would call super predictors. Exactly. Yeah. So trying to quantify that and find them and try to find that over longer time horizons. So that I found interesting versus people who are trying to find futures that may not be possible right now.
Right.
Like we were talking, there's a really interesting panel on like what makes a futurist. And that was just an example of this tension that I say, which is the corporate foresight, which is a little bit more like what is truth, what are the trends, how do we know that their trends are true, etc. Versus how do we design beyond humanity, beyond life-centered design, but like into more of an ecological, like entire human design, and what does that mean from a planetary perspective? But
we'll come back. We'll come back to what
sorry.
this like. I just want to clarify
Yeah,
what
absolutely.
you meant for the audience, but just to sweep in all the perspectives, then we'll come back to these tensions. But I think that one you identified is one we'll come back to, Roberto.
For sure.
Anna or Zayan, who has more seniority or juniority on how often they've been. I don't know. It's a toss up, I think. Yeah, Anna, or you can go for it.
I don't know who has the seniority. And then maybe in the context of seniority, I'd like to always be younger than the junior one. But so it's interesting because I might not give you the perspective that you might have hoped to have, but like Dubai Future Forum is there for all the futurists to come in and really hang out. Really, that is kind of what the gig is. And I think there are a couple of things that are happening in the background, and whole bunch of people who know each other hang out in the lobby, which is truthfully where I was. And then the openness of the forum itself to the public, of people who live in Dubai, and some of the conference like sessions that take place there. So my perspective might be a little bit different in that sense, but if I were to judge the sessions themselves, like I think once you've been to some of the conversations with some of the people, you kind of know where the conversation is going to go. So probably one of the more interesting things about Dubai Future Forum, and I think Roberto, you kind of speaking to those sessions, is that they do have a section for the corporate world to really kind of come in, or people who practice foresight within the corporate organizations to come in and speak to their experiences. And I think there's definitely a lot of conversations around how do you drive foresight and anticipatory thinking within the corporation that's not necessarily typically set up to accept any of those sort of conversations or even systems thinking. And it's a really hard job to actually bring in the methods and the thinking to the organization that is set up in a very different way. And then there were a couple interesting, like I'm thinking about what were my outstanding sessions, and actually Rel's session with, I forgot the guy's name, but it was one of the last sessions, and it's recorded. You guys can probably look it up. Was quite good because he's all about anticipatory thinking, and they sort of really talked about the future, well, right, the past and the future of Africa, and that was quite interesting conversation, very philosophical, very intellectual. Which sometimes is really hard to bring down to like, okay, so what do I do with this information now? I think that was one of the standout sessions. And if I were to say like what to watch, that one would be the one that I would recommend. And the other session that really stood out to me, and I will look up the name because it's escaping me right now, but there was this, I think it was a UK guy who does a lot of urban design in his practice. And I think, Roberta, you and I might have sat actually in that session together. I don't know if you remember his name, but he was talking about, he was probably one of the few people who were actually given like, this is how I practice my foresight, and this is how I do my projects, and this is the kind of my thinking and system and models that I use. And it had very interesting sort of ways that they were mapping out cities and kind of how they integrate not only this, like how the city lives in the infrastructure, but also like the social aspect of the city and what is it really intend to be for. And I thought it was interesting and one of the more energizing sessions. I'll tell you, the one session you shouldn't watch is, oh, there were the European Union ladies. It's a very dry cut kind of topic on, I can't even tell you what the topic was, because I know that they were talking about something of how they've integrated foresight in somewhere of what they were doing, but it was so dry, so hard to sort of listen in that I think it probably wasn't the least exciting sessions, and maybe the learning out of that would have been, if we want to get more people engaged with foresight and get excited about it, that is not the way to do. That doesn't quite work. What I will, maybe where I will live this with is the one of the things that the DFF does really well, aside the fact that they're actually bringing a whole bunch of people from across the world together, is the day 1 and day 3 or whatever learning. So there are 2 days of learnings and workshops. This time around, they kind of switched it up a little bit from what I've seen before. And one of the more interesting sessions that I've attended to, actually there were 2. One was with all the UNESCO chairs of the foresight. And it's funny that one of the first things Sahil kind of mentioned is like, we're going to talk about a whole bunch of things and nothing's going to happen. And I was like, I don't know about that. I'm here now. Something must happen. But I think, I mean, it was said in a joke around how do we connect students and programs together and system thinking and all the people who kind of touch the space of the foresight, futures thinking, systems thinking together. And there were a lot of different ideas about it, but I think it was becoming pretty evident that people who sit in the space of academia sometimes haven't, and I acknowledge that, sometimes having a really tough time like getting themselves out of the boundaries of, we need to build a course or a thing, and like, and is this going to be set in a way that we can say that this is good foresight? Like I do, there we can talk about it, and there can be discussion about what is good foresight and bad foresight and what we're actually teaching, and the people that are coming in, do we give them the right tools to be good at this? But I think from when the academia gets together, they get a little bit hung up on this, and I was like, well, that's the reason why people can get into the space is because we're talking about for a couple of years of how to connect us all and how to bring more people into it without doing a 10-year degree. anyway, we can talk about it later. So I think that was quite interesting. For the first time, I've seen all those people that I know together talking. I'm like, oh, okay, I get the vibe now. And I might have forgotten what. Oh, and the second session was done by the New Zealand team, who I'm actually in touch with, and they've done. So if you guys don't know, the Denmark, Finland, and now New Zealand have done a Futures Barometer survey where they actually went out and surveyed their residents about who is thinking about the future, how they think about the future, and who people think should be responsible for thinking about future. Something that I will and am actively trying to do here for us in Canada. And we kind of talked about what that could look like and where those insights can be taken. I think one of the ideas that actually I suggested, and there are a few people that really, really liked, is that if we're surveying the average Canadians or anyone, like average residents about the future, we might actually want to do exactly the same and probe how organizations think about this. And I think when you, especially for the people who practice foresight within the organizations, one of the things that will really don't ask the question is, do people who work there actually think that their organization is going to survive? Because CEOs openly say that they don't believe their organizations will. And I think that's there's some interesting things that can be played with. So yeah, I would say that's my very long but a quick recap of what I think the DFF was fun about this year.
Thank you. And you left a couple of juicy breadcrumbs that we'll come back to for sure. Zaid, why don't you share with us your experience with DFF and this year?
Yeah, for sure. So I've been going to DFF for all the years, 4 years that I've been running it, and presented last year on the role of emotions in socio-technical systems for brief-informed futures. And it's interesting. I like the way that they've set up the format, in the sense that they explore a number of verticals. So it changes each year. So there are different tracks and themes. So one is exploring the potentials of humanity, exploring innovations in healthcare, going with exploration, whether it's deep sea or outer space. And I think one interesting thing about the forum is that the Dubai government takes a big role in organizing and putting it on. And those who aren't familiar, Dubai is a city of contradictions. You know, it's on one hand, it's becoming like this global metropolis, design hub of the world, but then you've got interesting storied human rights histories. But then which country in the world doesn't now? But what they're trying to do right now is move from a fossil fuel dependence into a lot of clean tech and try to build up a big cultural infrastructure as well to try and move from this dependence on fuel. So they're trying to recruit futurists from all over the world. And they're also bringing in a lot of people to attend the forum from local enterprise, but also from almost every major arm of the Dubai government. So you've got all of the experts from the Dubai municipality, the airports, customs. So it's a really interesting place to talk to the people who are in charge of, say, managing customs for the airport, or the head of the Dubai Opera, for example, and talk about how they're approaching systems of culture, systems of trade. And the interesting thing is that their system is a lot less siloed than it is here. So say arts and culture, import, export, climate, they tend to talk to each other a lot more than they would here. So when they bring these folks together under a roof, like I think the Emirati component brings in some interesting conversations, but you get to hear stuff from folks you normally wouldn't at a typical foresight conference, because they don't focus typically on the foresight practitioner crowd. There are people there who have rarely practiced foresight as well. So I think it's helpful for also helping foresight break into different industries and governments. Another observation was that a lot of the European governments have foresight very firmly entrenched in, as well as with countries like Singapore. And they send over a lot of representatives from their government. Like Canada's got policy horizons and some good folks. But at the practice level, I find Europe is more evolved in how they look at their systems and how they play. Plus, I mean, Europe's history is so deep, like when it comes to the age of their cities and infrastructure. There's so much to talk about. I mean, it can ramble, but I think like
Yeah,
we can open the floor and maybe any questions folks have about the
exactly.
forum as well. And I think, and like to speak to Anna's points and Roberto's points, it's like things are all, I find multiple levels, like from very beginner to depth, but the best hangs, it's always about the hangs of these conferences, I find.
So is there anyone else on this call, before we move on to like, just want to open the floor, anyone else on this call that attended the recent DFF? Did I miss anyone? Okay, so it's just the four. So maybe just because we're going to also chat about some other events. I know Dubai Futures Forum has a lot of interest, so we can spend a little bit extra time on this, but maybe just for the next 10, 12 minutes, I'm just going to open the floor. I won't be in charge of like what questions get fielded, but if you want to use the raise the hand function underneath the react button, you can do that. If you have a question for any of the four discussants about their experiences, highlights, takeaways, conflicts, anything.
Nice. And that one thing before you start the share, I have to share a funny story that folks here I think will find funny from a system standpoint. So after the conference, it's like multiple days of intense conversations plus jet lag. So I was like, okay, I want to go to the beach and get away from everything. I sit down at the beach. I'm going to do a quick screen share here. Look what was next to me. Can you see my screen? Look what I sit down and I'm like, I know this book. Right next to me, the Donella Meadows Thinking in Systems. So I was like, whose book is this? And it winds up being the foresight head from Dubai Municipality, who was also at the beach. I was like, what are the odds? On a crowded beach, Donella Meadows is right there.
That's awesome. Leverage points on a beach. Cool. So yeah, questions from the audience on any questions or discussion points. Yeah, okay, Aileen, yeah, go for it.
I'm very curious about Roberto's comment that he felt like there was a certain like trade secret, like industrial espionage type vibe around people being cagey in their like how they use systems. What made you think that their caginess came from defensiveness?
Less defensiveness, more competitive advantage. Like
Well,
I'm just
but
thinking
are they like
strategic.
kind of the same thing, right? Like they're defending their IP or whatever.
Yes and no, right? Because I think this is the interesting thing that I noticed from a corporate perspective, at least. It was more like we have things that we believe are right and true for us and get us as close to predictive truth, let's just say, as we can, or something that we believe is useful in-house. But I also felt like a lot of people are figuring out what that means. So what I noticed is like in some orgs, it's under the R&D function. In some orgs, it's under the strategy function. But in every org, it's kind of like, how do we demonstrate our value? But they were not necessarily, they were hinting at how they do it, but no one was, to Anna's point, there was one person who was like, here's my methodology and here are the frameworks I use. And maybe that's just a function of how much time they have. Nobody. There you go. So Anna, you want to take the floor?
No, I didn't want to interrupt. But I think it's interesting when you talk about the corporate sessions, because I actually do know and work with people, and people, for those who don't know me, my final entrance into foresight, like the official title when I got the foresight practitioner next to my name, was with my last corporate role, which I was setting up the foresight capabilities. So all the sessions, those are all the people who helped me along the way to build out my capabilities within the organization. So that's why I was kind of jokingly saying I kind of know them all. And I think it's interesting to hear, Roberta, your perspective when you talk about it, because I think you're right. There's like a caveat to there's not enough time and nobody's gonna publicly share in exactly how they do that within their organizations, because their organizations, especially on the side of consumer packaged goods, are a little bit crazier about protective their tools, which I don't know why they would. But I think there's also something to say that there's actually not in many organizations are very well ironed out, this kinds of organizations, very well ironed out processes and places where foresight sits. And so sometimes what you don't hear is something that actually doesn't exist. I'd be super surprised if systems thinking as a even term shows up in, well, maybe Nike it might, I don't know, but definitely not when they present it out to broader organization, because that just doesn't lend. Talking about foresight doesn't land very well. You have to connect it to what the business objectives are. But even talk about like we have to think in systems, and here like systems thinking terminology, I think there are different ways that people try to be very creative about how to Trojan horse some of those things into the conversations with senior leaders or departments and whatnot. So to me, it was interesting how you talked about it. Like, oh, I guess that's a perception. That's interesting.
Yeah, so Zayan, you wanted to say something?
I'll let it slide.
Like, I'm just gonna combine this conversation with just a message that Corelia left in there as well. Like she had said, she attended in 2023. It was amazing to network the methodology, but you don't actually gain, much depth or insights about the future. And this kind of matches what you were saying about some of the superficiality about perhaps some of the insights that might come from whether they're corporate heavy. And I want to combine the comment from Corelia with my own question, if I may just jump in on this point about systems. So just to check with you for like systems are not the systems approaches, because this is Systems in Ontario, I have to filter the question. But the systems approaches are not necessarily made explicit at these conferences, if I'm understanding it correctly. Like they may not latch on to a VSM or system dynamics or whatever. They may just genuinely refer to systems-oriented approaches. Is that correct?
For the most part, I mean, it's funny because sometimes they don't even go into foresight using deep terminology there. Right. So it's unique in that, I mean, it doesn't cater to as much to the academic realms of foresight and systems, but rather industrial or policy-based applications, and sometimes just jamming around perspectives.
Awesome. Markan?
Yeah, I agree. I feel like I remember attending this session, which was about tools, like, best tool or whatever for foresight. And then after the session was over, I was like, but what was the tool that, where's the tool? Which tool was I supposed to know after this? So I also felt like nobody was talking about like, right, like just say what tool it is, but it's more of like, running around the bush and telling about more about the learnings or the strategies that they might have for like, formulated from these tools or these ways of working. And also about systems, yeah, I agree. There was nothing that's academically like, nuanced that way. It was more of like it was very superficial in terms of the way it was being talked about. And I feel like yeah, a lot of these conversations were mostly about what was the impact or outcome of these processes or practices more than just how they went through or what are those things like tools or ways to really go through that process. So yeah.
Yeah.
I'll give the caveat to that. I think in the sessions, things tended to be superficial. And I find that at so many conferences, things tend to be often the speakers promoting a project, a book, or it's meant to go for a mass audience, right? But because the conference brings in such established leaders in the space, academics, people who have created frameworks or heads of orgs, the conversations afterwards, I find, are where you can go really deep. And it's a very good avenue for creating new projects, clients, or just really diving deep on some of the frameworks with some of the people who created them.
Yeah, that fits well with what Anna was just writing about as well, about the role of soft power and the role of other forums where you can connect different audiences together, a more practitioner or deeper audience with a more public-facing audience. I just want to hear insights or knowledge about the future. More to say on that, but Roberto?
Yeah, I just want to say, building off what Zayan was saying, is yeah, the conversations in between conversations was brilliant to go deep and to hear for me at least, hearing what everybody is doing, like what the actual researchers are actually doing when you're able to have those conversations, was invaluable, because that's when you're able to get the snippets of who's doing what where, and you can kind of start to see what are the themes, like what is South America up to, what is the Asia Pacific region up to, what are the priorities of these different regions, and what are they looking at, and which lenses are they framing things at. So it was really interesting from that perspective, and really hopeful, I would say. It was like a gathering of a bunch of different people who are fundamentally optimistic, and fundamentally unreasonable at the same time, searching for foresight and system solutions, which was really fantastic. But I think it was interesting to see that tension, but also no one was, and I think it was really important to say this out loud, even though there was that tension, I think it was very civil and very hopeful space to be in, to see people being like, okay, this is a tension, that's cool, let's work beyond it, and let's continue to negotiate beyond it. And as Zaid was saying, like, saw a lot of people say, hey, let's chat, let's jam on a new methodology, or let's jam on a new way of doing things, which is pretty fantastic. And a lot of research projects were birthed for sure.
So a different angle for the four of you is, you talked a little bit about the panels, and you talked a little bit about the the informal conversation. I was just wondering, I think we also see that there's often also like mini, not just workshops, but experiential components, like interactive exhibits and things like that. Were there any that stood out for you this year, or what have your experiences been interacting with those? Any learnings or insights you can share?
The workshops tend to be quite interesting. Like this year did one with the Singapore government from the Prime Minister's office on the use of effective AI and policy development around people literally falling in love with their chatbots. And those sessions, I find you can go fairly deep. And the people who attend, it's like one of the people at our table designs the gear assembly for Formula One race cars. And then, you've got venture capital, and then you've got an engineer, and everyone's sharing their perspective. So I think because it opens itself up to a very wide audience, the workshops allow the participants to really speak, and you tend to get some points of view from places in the world, industries, sectors that you don't always, they're pretty unique. They tend to be. And workshops, again, because you've got a lot of people, practitioners who've created games, and you get a lot of prototyping of different games and different ways people bring play into their systems as well. There's the first part, another part of the question you were asking. Do you mind repeating your question?
I was just saying interactive, like exhibits or experiential parts.
Yeah.
Sometimes they have that in a gallery or something.
So there was, they usually have experiential stuff scattered around throughout, and they have parts of the museum open. One part of their permanent exhibits I like, it's a section devoted to human factors called the Heal Institute, and looks at different senses, and they change up programming in there. This year they had one on a reflection of the attribution of identity to sense, and how they connect to different points in our time period of time as well. So how a smell can take you back to a certain point of your life. And if it was a provocation on climate change, that if, say, forest degradation had, you could never smell a particular flower or a particular smell again, how would that affect your sense of identity? And how would that affect how you show up in the world? So there are a few things like that. There was one last year where they compared synthetic fragrances. I don't know how the smell thing came both years. It was really good ones. But last year's one was synthetic fragrance versus a real one, and showing that even when we get all the chemicals right, sometimes there are things that we don't know about a system, that we even don't know to interrogate. And they're showing that how even when something was chemically identical, it was sometimes sensorially different.
Nice. Very cool. Rose, go ahead.
So I'm not an expert in this, as you know. And this is a very interesting conversation. I'm encouraged by the optimism, and some of you have mentioned, it's a group of optimistic people who came together. The tension between foresight and uncertainty, I like that, Roberto. I thought that was a really nice nuance. I'm curious though, because I live in a world just like all of you, where I'm sensing there's more anxiety rather than hope. Lots of events, right, around this. And if that topic was sort of a subtext, or was it explicitly discussed? If you want to move forward as a society, it can't be 100 people at a forum. But how was that? Did anyone talk about the directly, indirectly? And maybe that's at the practical level. So maybe that wasn't discussed because someone mentioned that wasn't really, they didn't get a sense of that. But if anyone has any insights into that, I'd appreciate it. Thanks.
It varies. That was actually part of what we were discussing in our topic last year.
Oh, okay.
And that was like, as I was saying, looking at the role of emotions, socio-technical systems, and what people have to reconcile with or give up sometimes to imagine a potential future. So really deconstructing kind of how to envision what is being lost, like losses in the past, like whether it's something wide scale, like the impacts of war or economic turmoil, or at an individual level. How do you balance optimism versus pessimism versus reality, and do that from a number of objective truths, and doing that with something as subjective as emotion, right? And recognizing that emotion can kind of, the saying, strategy eats culture for breakfast, right? And kind of when whether it's at an organizational level, or even looking at culture after a leadership transition, or looking at a whole country after a regime change, there's a lot of societal elements that need to be dealt with, and a lot of them come down to emotion, and logic goes out the window sometimes in those. So it's trying to figure out how to really grapple with the nuances of that to kind of design a brief informed future, or look at what the inputs and outputs are in the system beyond like capital, resources. And there are a few folks who were dealing in that line of thought as well, but it's like scattered, right? It's not every single one, but they are there.
So anyone like Marcon, any thoughts on the explicitness of future anxieties? Was there a thread running that you kind of noticed that was present at the forum?
I think it also really depends on, or like in the conference, it depended on who was talking about it. Because if, like it's what position they hold, maybe it's a corporate, maybe it's a government or what. So the perspective that they were putting out was really dependent on their positionality overall in the space. And like I was talking about, like when I was on the panel, the people with me were those who were instructors, teaching, educating professors. So for them, like, when they were talking about their experiences teaching foresight now, for them, it was more about that we cannot give this perspective that there's no hope to the students when we are teaching, although they come with that perspective to us. And then we were talking about how we need to be giving this thing that, it is still a draft. You don't know, the future might change. Maybe what we think is a dark phase right now could be something that we look forward to in future. So I think the whole concept of like the anxiety about it really felt different in a different session because of the people who were there or who was talking about it.
Right.
Because if you just look at it from the lens of, for example, Dubai government, they are all hopeful and painting a very bright, colorful picture, doing things, but at the same time, you all know the realities of the work that has been going on. So yeah.
Nice. Right. So the framing of hope and anxiety and optimism is based on the framing of the person presenting,
Yeah.
or whoever, how they're positioning the conversation. So
Yeah.
why don't, just for the sake of time, why don't we go to Dan as final question on DFF, and then we'll have some responses to Dan's question, and then we'll move on to the second workshop. Dan?
Yeah, thanks guys for giving me some insight into the DFF thing. And I have to say that in listening to you guys, I'm pretty amped up. I think that I would be just doing myself a disservice not to attend. So the question I would ask you is that, of course, the best experience is one where you're there, Like you're sitting in front of people, like Zayan said, you're on the beach and you're hanging out with some people. This is where I like to be. However, I'm not sure if I can make that big leap of getting out there and stuff. I mean, I was thinking to myself, maybe I could do baby steps. I mean, maybe, I don't know, is there an online option where I can kind of get a feel for things? And because really, the question that has been raised about whether we should have hope, this is a very tricky thing because um, if you don't have a futures conference, if you don't have this foresight thing, it's really hard to have hope. And so I'm not the kind of person that wants to be living in that world where I don't have hope. The hope may be, how shall I say, without any foundation, but I don't want to live in that world. And I think this thing that you folks had a chance, an opportunity to kind of experience, I need to find a way to be involved in that in some way. So I welcome sort of your feedback on that.
I can maybe throw a plug in to Anna. And maybe you can, honestly, Anna, maybe you can just share what you're, as in response to Dan, maybe you can just describe what you're hoping to build through the Canadian Foresight Network and how that might fill in some of these questions and thematic points. And then we'll move on to the next workshop.
Oh, well, thank you. I was just kind of thinking that in my head, but I wasn't going to say. Oh, there's so many things, but I think then to your point, one of the so Canadian Foresight Network, hopefully where we can take it is going to be is in the progress of being a community for curious, hopeful, foresight adjacent, or even foresight practitioners. And to me, I don't separate systems thinking necessarily from foresight in a way, or anticipatory thinking in that way, but just the people who actively work and think about the future to come together and help us drive that future's literacy and that thinking and hope within the country across the different structures, people, academia, not-for-profit, private sectors, and for us to come together. So that's what the space is meant to be. And everybody's welcome to come in. There are no fees. There are no membership dues. We're just building out that community together for exactly that, to exchange sort of the ways that we can help ourselves, our organizations, our country, the cities, just to think a little bit beyond today and tomorrow, and create that hope and actually create an action to get ourselves to the better place, right? Because there is a way to do it. So that's what the community is for. It's, I think in the beginning it started as bringing the practitioners together. My hope is that we can really take the practitioners and connect ourselves with the bigger projects and open more doors, definitely within Canada, across just beyond policy horizons, so that we can do that work and really drive meaningful change. That's what this is for. So and we do spend quite a bit of time on WhatsApp chatting about all kinds of things. And as you were talking, then actually what I was thinking about is Nick Badminton, who, if you guys don't know him, he's quite, I think, well-known futurist, I would say, and we can drop his link in the chat. But he often talks about hope as a strategy, and so if you craving some of the hopeful conversations and just really deeper thinking, I think that's the space to come in, and just really share sort of projects, ways to collaborate, and how we can build a better world. We'll also build out the map of, and it's going to be an ongoing thing, of foresight practitioners or foresight adjacent people, so that we can find each other when we work on the projects. So that's what the community is about. Yeah, thanks that you've put Nick's website on the list, and I can drop sort of where you can sign up.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Once I overcome challenges with Gmail, we're usually okay.
Zayan, you want to get a final word in before we move on?
Yeah, the short answer is yes, they live stream it. And well, I think for the APF is a good place if you want to tap into some of the international parts of it, the Association of Professional Futurists. I find they have a lot of setups. Plus, if you reach out to the Dubai Future Forum, and this is for everyone in the room, if you reach out early with some ideas, they have calls for submissions all the time. And the Dubai government's pretty generous about if they like your idea, they'll fly you down, and they offer stipends, which are much more generous than a lot of other conferences for delegates as well. So it might, who knows? Shoot your shot.
Awesome. Well, thank you both Dan, thank you for the question. And I would love to hear more about the Canadian Foresight Network. Feel free to drop the sign up instructions in the chat. I think a lot of folks would be interested. Anna, you're going to continue to be in the hot seat. It sounds like we're winding down, but we're not. We're just winding down part one. So that was DFF. That was the conversation about DFF. I'm going to be a little bit more structured with the next two. This one, I was a little bit okay to have it free flowing, which is always great. But the next workshop we're going to talk about is one that Paradigma put on, Eva, based out of Ottawa and other locations. She was hosting Riel Miller. This was in December. There's not a lot of information, Anna, that I have as a description, so I'll just say the title to everyone so they can drum roll. It was called Anticipation in the Context of Today's Poly-Crisis. And this was a special workshop with Riel Miller. And it took place in person. It was in Ottawa. And this dovetails off of Roberto's point about anticipation and foresight. So a couple of structured questions, Anna. Can you give us a little bit more about the workshop, the objectives of what it was? And once you do that, question two is, can you tell us what occurred in the workshop and what was your experience?
Yeah. Okay. Let me think. So the purpose of the workshop was, I guess there were a couple, but it was also done with the College University, and there was the first part of the session was for students to really present I think there were maybe their final foresight projects. I'm not entirely sure because I wasn't in the beginning of that project because I was severely delayed. So I've caught on a couple of those sessions. And then the second part was all the attendees, and quite a lot of them being in Ottawa, are coming from all parts of the government, including Policy Horizons. Just one workshop and do some of the typical, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Miller's kind of work, but often it's about futures literacy, right? And how you build capacity. And often it's based on the Futures Literacy Lab sort of approach. So just really workshopping that a little bit and kind of talk about futures literacy and how to drive that capacity. The second to that part was a presentation, which was supposed to be about sort of living in uncertainty. But really, if you're familiar with Miller and his work and how he talks, often it's about really similar topics, right? And the difference between the I guess the traditional foresight versus anticipatory thinking, monumentalism, and how we really need to break ourselves free from thinking of the strategic foresight as like an end game versus really thinking about how to unleash the imagination, coming to some of the different conclusions. I can drop, I was actually typing this, so I will drop the link to the Futures Literacy playbook. It does exist. It exists on the UNESCO website. It's been a while since I looked at it. It might not be as clear as the structure of that lab and workshops in it, but at least it's a resource. And often in those workshops, two things happen, at least for the time that is allowed, or there is. Usually there are two exercises that he does in groups. One is probably less of an interest, so maybe in the interest of time, I'll actually jump to the second one. One of the exercises is where he really asks someone to think about 20, 30, 40 years out, and imagine if everyone in the world could use telepathy, and what would that mean and how it could work. I've sat in maybe 4 or 5 of those sessions, and I watched I don't know, by now it's 50 groups probably doing this exercise very, very often. And I think it's quite interesting. It comes down to 2 or 3 similar patterns of the way we think. And it's quite interesting to observe it because it really makes you think about how much of our imagination is really dependent on the things that we know. And so if you think about telepathy, one of the first things that comes up is like tin hats, right? And people using tin hats, or people having longer noses, being inspired by Pinocchio. And he sort of takes those and really breaks it down and helps people kind of think about what the assumptions that got them into some of the discussions that they had and why it's happening and how to break free of them. I don't know if this is like too vague or helpful, but there are enough actually, like I think videos of Rails actually doing those things that might be interesting to look up. And what he often talks about is if you kind of talk about future and about some of those exercises, it allows you to see kind of or talk about the future from 3 different angles and ultimately come back to the present and make better decisions, but free from the assumptions and mental models that we're all accustomed to. The presentation, he never really sticks to a presentation, but it's often around those key topics, and I can kind of drop a couple of the pictures and decks if it's helpful. But I think his key message usually to the people is around, that the primary goal is not just improve decisions by anticipating what might happen, but actually think of this as a learning process and understand how futures can be imagined. And rather than asking like, what can we predict or what is preferable, like how and why we're using the future right now, and focusing on the process versus like the outcome based, which I think when we talk about strategic foresight, are not quite there. He's he's a philosophy guy, right? He's a very philosophical guy. And so monumentalism is often the key of what he talks about. And when you actually listen to those sessions, it breaks down quite a lot of mental models and your thinking and how you even, like, you go back to your work and kind of see where some of those things are really being stuck. So I think in that sense, it's quite powerful, just really shaking up the way of thinking. That was the purpose of the workshop. That's kind of how the day was structured. Okay,
so you're at Carleton University. Part of it is for students, and they're working through some of their futures work, but then part of it is Riel's like a continuous, aspect of what he presents in other talks. And then, but also the takeaways that you were describing is about building more the long-term literacy, breaking down the assumptions that you have and how you see the future and why those should be revisited. And so, Anna, for you, what are some of the takeaways that you draw from not just this workshop, but this workshop plus Riel's work as you envision the evolution and growth of foresight practice?
Ooh, I think I'm still on that. I quite possibly am still on that journey, and not quite possibly, I definitely am. I came across his thinking and teaching a couple years ago, and it's interesting because it was in the middle of me building out maybe more than a couple of years ago, but it was in the middle of me building out the foresight capability within the organizations that very much wanted an answer, never mind talking about the actual strategic foresight kind of work, and thinking about anticipation. So I myself was already sort of on probably of the path a little bit away from anticipatory thinking when sort of I came across his teachings. And what I would say is, like, and maybe that's my interpretation, but I don't think I'm probably not too far off. Like, I think from his point of view, anticipatory thinking really precedes the strategic foresight, right? And if we were to really reframe the work and reframe from the world of, from the thinking of the monumentalism, we might quite come up with, exploring futures where permanence is sort of irrelevant, scale is fluid, like value is intangible. And if you do all of those things, there's actually quite a bit of work that needs to be redone when we talk about the futures and what we hope the strategic foresight work to accomplish. I don't have the answers, just like he doesn't when you ask him like, what am I supposed to do now? But I think it's quite a bit of it's a space to continuously reframe the way you think and the way that you imagine futures. And I actually think, and maybe that's what kind of Roberto talked about when we talked about DFF, I think there's quite a bit of still a gap between people who practice strategic foresight that come from a very specific way that was taught to a true anticipatory thinking, and then how bringing that back to the work that needs to be done. And I don't know if we crack it. I don't know if we ever crack it. I don't, if it's not a end point in journey, it's a process. That's probably, you probably never arrive, you just learn. But I think that maybe when we talk about what's the next evolution for foresight work or future thinking should be, it's probably how do we take that and actually start really embedding this everywhere.
Okay.
Provided that foresight has only been done in like 1% of places.
Right.
Right. So I don't know. I don't have an answer. It's like I think I've just went on a lot of thinking out loud while and like streaming my consciousness as you asked that question. But I myself haven't found what that connection is, because I do spend some time building out those capabilities and talking to organizations about strategic foresight and future thinking. And when I ask myself like where my assumptions are and how some of those assumptions really, what would I'll say and how would I reframe it, I myself get really stuck. And I was like, but I quite enjoy my new mentalism in some cases. And so I don't know. I think there's something to say. Maybe we don't have all the frameworks and models and the way to teach this worked out, and maybe that's kind of where we all have to come together and really think about this a little bit, because I think we're not quite there yet.
Gotcha. Okay. I'm just going to open it up to the floor, like maybe take one or two questions. It doesn't have to be directed at Anna, but if you have a question about her experience at the workshop, or she's representing Riel's work in some ways, or if you just have a question about anticipatory versus futures thinking, I'll open the floor, any themes that we want to talk about related to this. Yeah, Aileen.
So, Anna, it sounds like you've been to a lot of these sessions. I think you said you've seen like 50 different groups and what they come up with. Was there anything special or different in how you'd characterize the Ottawa group of participants, perhaps compared to other groups you've seen go through it?
That's a good question. And I actually have seen some of those people in those groups before. I don't know if it's necessarily special, but I think it is interesting. I'll go back to the comment that I've made earlier, that even the people who, and there are people who professionally practice foresight, there are a lot of people there from Policy Horizons. There are a lot of people who teach foresight at OCAD. Even those people, when we go through some of those exercises, you can still, when we talk about like, because they present back what they've done in their groups, and then Raul's kind of breaking it down, even they still fall into some of those traps. And I think I find that very, very fascinating. And I honestly only caught myself on that thought this time around, because I was not in the session, I was just observing. And I realized that oh, wow, even the people who do this for very, very many years, they still kind of fall into those traps. I would say the conversation is a little bit more elevated than in other groups, but I don't think that in any number of the times that I've seen this quite yet, and I haven't seen like there are stages, right? I haven't seen the stage like 4 or 5 yet. But those assumptions, they're so deeply ingrained in us all, that I think it's really hard to shake. And I think that's really interesting. That actually what really surprises me. So did not answer your question, Ellen, but I think you know me by now.
I can ask. That doesn't mean there will be an answer. Or there'll be an answer. It might not be the answer.
Yeah.
Anyone else have any thoughts or questions about this session or related to the topics?
I think
Sure.
Jailbreak maybe mentioned he had done some work with Gail Miller or attended something like that.
Yeah,
don't know if
I can definitely add on a nice experience. So in my case, I got noticed very last minute that Riel was in Montreal. He was just stopping on his way back, so I was noticed just a few days before he came. And it was not a workshop; it was more like the opportunity being offered to meet with a few practitioners in the city. So it was myself who got reached out and someone else. So the other person, the other person was representing the company Demain, which is a foresight consultancy based in Montreal, and they had an interview, a podcast interview. So they recorded a podcast in French because Riyadh is bilingual. So this podcast might be released in a couple of weeks. And I got offered the opportunity just to have a lunch with him, which turned out to become some kind of unstructured open interview over lunch, and I managed to capture the content of the conversation, and I turned the content of the conversation into an article that I will publish in Compass. And basically, the topic I was very interested to investigate with him was how to sustain and build communities of future practitioners. How can you incubate and build a group of people who are practicing future thinking, and how can you sustain this group in the long term? I've been involved with such an initiative in Montreal. I was leading the chapter of Speculative Future Montreal for 5 years. I just closed this opportunity last summer for different reasons. I can talk about it later. And I've been also involved in organizations and with not-for-profit building foresight practices. And I wanted to get his perspective on what does it take to sustain those communities, those labs he has been opening around the world. So kind of similar to you, Anna, we had first conversation around, my first question was, what is the minimum action that an organization can take to promote this future thinking stance, or to at least introduce like a mindset of future literacy. So we had a first conversation around what he calls the obsession with control, the fact that we are obsessed with control culturally in organization. And the first step that we have to take is to acknowledge that it's an illusion. It's what he called toxic, and we have to start with a mindset shift. So he was actually quite critical with about some of the habits or way of robotic foresight in organization, which sometime or in some occasion come as a very didactic practice with a lot of frameworks, with a lot of very complex words. And from his perspective, the starting point is just to accept that there are some mental models or cultural habits that we have to drop before even thinking about embracing the future cone or like the 3 horizon models. We need to start with this mindset shift. And then we had a conversation around so the different principles that needs to be developed to build a future of future practitioner in the community space, in the organizational space. It's my background is in organizational development, so I wanted to merge my observation from organizational development with the observation of foresight, and I can share the article, the draft of the article if anyone is interested, and it will be publicly available in a couple of weeks from now. But basically, we landed on 4 principles. One of them being contextualization of the practice. One of them being starting from a natural curiosity for the future, because we are already all engaged in future thinking without even knowing about it. When we're planning for groceries, when we're planning for retirement, for holidays, we are engaging with the future in many different ways, but most of the time we are not actively calling that foresight, but we have to start from this an inner curiosity that we already have and build upon it. Then you have one piece around the importance of building share language, building a vocabulary about the future, which is accessible and open. The first one was about the importance of reflection, so building mechanisms for reflecting together about the frameworks which are structuring a way of approaching the future and imagining. So it's very rooted in group psychology concept more than foresight concept. And, so we use that to kind of connect our two experiences. And in my case, what I noticed in Montreal, was that there are a lot of people thinking about the future, but they don't really call that foresight. And I wanted to kind of bring this topic to him. For me, like the future in Montreal, at least, is driven by actors in the cultural sector, in the artistic sector. There are a lot of festivals, a lot of artist groups, activist groups who are kind of doing foresight without putting the name of foresight on their work. And I wanted to also have this point of view on how can we tap into some of the existing forces of future thinkers, which are not calling themselves foresight practitioners, but are still doing this kind of work. So that was the conversation basically. So it's different from what you had in Ottawa, I believe, but kind of also extending some of the team that you described. It was an interesting conversation, and hopefully this article will be interesting to anyone, and I'd be happy to share it.
Thank you, Alberic. That was super complimentary to the experiences, and thank you for sharing that. I think there's a lot of people that would be interested, Alberic, in your upcoming work or in the synthesis. So if you want to drop your email in the chat, maybe that way people can reach out to you, or in any other way that you feel comfortable. I will say just my playback of what I'm hearing from Anna, your perspective about the anticipatory thinking, and Alberic about what is the minimum things that the people can start to do. Both of you shared the sentiment of almost like shedding preconceived notions, giving way from the core assumptions of how we already think about the futures through certain tools or frameworks or otherwise. And I find that really interesting because I don't know if that's like a reset of the field or almost like hit refresh to, like give foresight and anticipatory thinking like a different shape. But I just find it interesting that you do find that in different field buildings that happen in other fields, not just foresight, where it might take a course that starts to deviate from its core abilities or who it attracts or what types of language it builds. And Alberic, you mentioned that he mentioned that shared language is one of the key components of it. And so I'm just observing, no hard critique one way or the other, but it's really interesting that is occurring in the foresight space, and maybe that will be more of a conversation and in the Canadian network and beyond.
Agree. I don't though. I think we all agree with everything she say. And actually, Albrecht kind of covered the first part of really how Rail starts his sessions. That is truly like some of the core messages. But I don't know if it's necessarily a function of the field really shifting. I think that a lot of the conversations about the futures has been overtaken by very strong proponents of specific visions of the future, and it made its way through many different ways, but it's made its way into how we talk about futures, whether that's at the public, at the policy level, or at the corporate level. And I think we're all having a really tough time differentiating that. And that's why the kind of when you talk about the reset is required, that's why the reset is required. And I'm actually quite critical both of the corporate foresight, but also of the foresight that is being done at the public and government and policy levels, because there are a lot of assumptions that are baked in there that to me sometimes quite shocking actually, because I think when we talk about the futures, we can't be based it without getting into the details into some of the assumptions that is being talked about. And so maybe it's not a field needing reset or deviating, but rather our assumptions really need to be really, really, really examined. I don't think we do that enough.
Fair point. Fair point. So Rose, just in the spirit of time, you can share your maybe a rapid format of the question, and then we'll move on to the third and final playback.
Yeah, very quickly. My observation, most of us are experiencing polycrisis. It kind of goes to what you said, Zaid, about, are there certain characteristics of those who are perhaps well-grounded in how to navigate a polycrisis? Or why are some, they just can't? They give up hope, or they polarize, or they put their head in the sand. Is that coming out as sort of to help people kind of navigate this space? I don't know if that's clear or not, but is there kind of, a set of, are those things being discussed at all? It goes to what you said, Anna, that do you become baked in your ideas, and it deviates from what this whole practice or this whole area is supposed to do, is open your thinking about how to navigate crisis or anticipate.
I don't know if anybody wants to jump in, or if that.
Oh,
I'll one sentence or less.
Petri might.
Yeah, this is one aspect of the polycrisis. And Donna Miller was mentioned previously, and that relates to the limit stuff from the original work, Club of Rome and whatever. And this might be against the community perspective, but there seems to be an aspect of this where portions of the polycrisis are engineered to reduce agency, where how much of this dark future, of this dim future, is intentionally inculcated to, to be able to push changes forward that might not be in the interests of everybody, but might be in the interests of a smaller group of people.
So there's a lot. I'm going to leave that tension and that provocation. Thank you, Rose, for that question. And Petri, I love that perspective. I think there's a lot of actually sympathy for that perspective, maybe in this room, more than appears. But let's come back to that, and let's mash that together at the end with a bunch of our reflections. But just for the sake of time, I'm going to get in the third workshop. So Aileen, you're in the hot seat on this one. But just really quickly, I'll just share my screen for a second. This one was called Jailbreaking Canada, presented by the Gameplay Labs, as well as Suzanne, Professor Suzanne from Superordinary Lab. The short one sentence is: it invites participants to question assumptions and unlock new possibilities for more equitable and sustainable tech futures. And it was described as a 3-day play shop about the role of games in helping us anticipate or look at different futures. Aileen, that's my playback of the thing, but maybe question one is you can give us a framing of what was this workshop in your own words. And then question number two is what was your participation like, and what was your experience through the workshop? If you can share that back with the group.
For sure. So although Emma Westcott and Suzanne Stein were the organizers, kind of like the featured speakers and facilitators were Madeline Ashby and Cory Doctorow, who are both science fiction writers. Cory Doctorow, I think particularly, is really incredible as somebody who does a lot of systems thinking, and I don't know how aware he is of the discipline. But he, because of the way he operates and because of the way he sees the world as being so interconnected, is one of those people who just is constantly talking and thinking in systems. So I felt like there was a very strong through line of systems on this. And it was a bit of for Cory Doctorow, a bit of a side quest for him from his book tour he was doing for his nonfiction book called Enshittification. So that's not a term that he invented, but it's one that he certainly has popularized over the last, call it like 2 to 4 years. Enshittification being, you know, the like kind of like joke of the like so firmwared out the wazoo toaster that like you can't even make toast because your device, which could be quite analog, is so like locked down and saddled with various software that doesn't in any like actually impedes the functionality of the thing. So he wrote a whole book about that because it's a bit of an inevitability, shall we say, for a lot of consumer goods these days. And so this jailbreaking workshop, and I don't know the genesis necessarily of like that topic specifically, but I thought it was really interesting because to me, this idea of jailbreaking, if anybody had like an old school iPhone when they first came out, I feel like a bit of an idiot calling like 20-year-old technology old school. But yeah, when you think about if anybody who was jailbreaking the operating system on their handy dandy iPhone back in the day, because, right? Yes, Anna, we did get old. And we're just only going to get older together. Bad news or good news, depending on your perspective. Yeah, so jailbreaking being an interesting antidote, counterpoint, countermeasure to enshittification, right? If we are going to reclaim agency by intentionally breaking the systems, quite dysfunctional systems that a lot of our consumer goods and even public services are saddled with. It does have like quite a natural interplay with Corey's book and book tour. For the like 3-day event itself, it started with a lecture from Madeline Ashby, which was fantastic, as well as some like words from Corey, and then we split off into groups. And what I find interesting about these sorts of things, as you might be able to tell by the question I asked Anna, is, you know, whether it's Dubai, it's a play shop, it's Riel Miller in Ottawa, like all of these things are ways to bring different people together, to Zaid's point, and like get people to talking to each other who wouldn't normally talk to each other about a specific topic that maybe they don't spend a lot of time thinking about, and see what they can come up with. So for me, it was very interesting because I felt like there was a level of intentionality in the audience in this play shop of bringing together people who had come through the SFI program at OCAD, as well as people who had come through the Digital Futures program, because there's a lot of overlap in interests often and kind of sensibility, but with the Digital Futures folks being a little more like tinkerish, like they'll get hands-on and just be building things, whereas the SFI folks are more let's sit and think about things. Not being pejorative, hopefully that doesn't read as pejorative for either camp. Yeah, and so I think interesting that it seemed like there was a bit of intentionality to get the tinkerers and the thinkerers talking to each other, which I thought was awesome. I don't know, like from a system perspective of like, let's build a system for people to play together rather than work with each other. I don't know that if I felt that like going all the way down in everything, but I thought it was like a fun concept. Yeah, and that's my spiel.
Aileen, could you give us, the audience, a sense of what they mean by play shop and what the role of play is in these types of workshops?
For sure. And I would invite Roberto to interrupt me at
Sorry,
any point.
Roberto,
Usually he's way too polite to interrupt me. So this is going to be a fun challenge for him to see if he can interrupt me. Maybe just interrupt me right now, Roberto. What did you think the role of play was? Oh, you raised your hand. I'm so disappointed in you.
Well, I can't interrupt you, Ailey. We know. The role of play was actually pretty deliberate through LARPing, so like live action role playing. Specifically, do you remember, Aileen? I forget the name of the methodology specifically, but it was you were paired off into groups.
Microscope.
And you were microscope. Thank you.
See, I'm a good interrupter.
That's amazing. But it was through this microscope of where do we want to get to this mythical jailbroken future, and everyone had to take turns role playing. How do we get there? And it was almost like, from a forecasting perspective, it was almost like role playing backcasting in real time. So you were backcasting, and nobody could criticize the future or a future element or a step, but you had to yes and. So it was very improv based. So we were playing with steps towards it, and then we ended up playing with prototypes. So I think Aileen really hit the nail on the head with tinkerers and thinkers, but specifically there was a huge emphasis on prototyping. But Aileen?
So
Zaid, do you have a question?
no, I thought that was a great. Thank you, Roberto. I forgot to plug you in that you also attended the workshop, so thank you. And so the role of play here is to give people like certain roles that they're playing, literally roles that they're playing, live action role playing, LARPing, and it's kind of you're kind of manifesting or not manifesting, but you're trying to embody like the way to get to that future. So that sounds very compelling. And I think because this audience, as Aileen was mentioning, there's a digital futures component to the graduate program at OCAD University who actually are more hands-on. They work with those Dorito kits or whatever they're called in circuits and Java, C++, lights on, LED, etc. Zayan, I'm butchering all your favorite technologies in one sentence. So I guess the last question before we open up to the group is reflections, Aileen and Roberto, about what did you take away? What was cool? What was neat? Especially Aileen, the perspective you had about Corey and others who don't self-describe themselves as futurists, but you're able to add a layer of a workshop around someone who does the work like that. Just love to hear your takeaways and reflections. Same with you, Roberto.
Yeah, so, and I think actually to your point of people talking around systems and like using so many system concepts, leaning so heavily on them and using them so expressively and so effectively, but never explicitly say like, oh yes, and I'm using systems thinking concepts. And I think that might be part of why the idea of like jailbreaking as a metaphor and also jailbreaking as like a genuine, sincere objective is really powerful, because in the world we live in, the audience that was in that room are also very deeply familiar with the idea of like an operating system, right? And something I often talk about with people who are, when we're talking about like why are Canadians particularly good systems thinkers and giving ourselves like a nice big pat on the back. I think when we have systems where there's a clear choice, where there's like clear optionality, then it does make systems more apparent, right? And so the idea that this metaphor of jailbreaking, because most people, I would say like most people who like engage in technology are at least somewhat familiar with like iOS versus Android. And it gives them like a really rich, vivid systems frame of reference to borrow from, and then they can use that metaphor in other spaces. I
I
don't know if
love
that
that.
answers your question.
No, I love that. Like you're saying, basically saying like the powerful metaphor really does a lot of work in trying to build that shared understanding of how the participants and facilitators and everyone can interact with it. And maybe there's a lot of lessons we can learn from that, especially in the systems community, not just foresight, but how we build that shared metaphor, even if we don't have the same exact strands of language. So well stated. Roberto, any of your reflections from the play shop?
Yeah, I really I'm trying to think of what else I can add to Aileen's description, because I thought she described it extremely well. But yeah, this idea of dialogic design, we talk about that in systems, and it was really interesting to see that, especially from Madeline Ashby's perspective, and from the prototyping perspective of unintended consequences. So part of the jailbreaking workshop was also asking, okay, so what if we did jailbreak it? Whatever it is, whatever the system was that we were looking at, okay, what are the unintended consequences? What are the reverberations that would happen in the rest of society if we were to jailbreak blank? Because we were asked to examine a specific area that you could jailbreak and then prototype something, whether that be a policy or an actual physical prototype, which some of the digital futures people actually did code and make actual physical prototypes, which was amazing. So yeah, I think that was really interesting as well as a systems thinker to sort of also have to encourage people to create a narrative around unintended consequences as well.
Nice. Very cool. That's always interesting to like try to see manifested in a workshop, the unintended consequences effect, because we feel it when we go out there in the world, but it's always like hard to hit that point in a workshop. Opening the floor for any other questions to either Aileen or Roberto or anyone about any of the topics related to Dubai Futures Forum, anticipatory systems, play shops, and jailbreaking structures overall. We did not talk about RST. That's true. That's true. I didn't go as far back as RSD. There was a lot in there, kind of doing a foresight bend to it. The timing is getting tight, Anna, so I won't totally open it, but if anyone, I don't know, if anyone has any reflections or other questions.
I guess the word hope was mentioned at the end.
Yeah.
Or at the beginning of this conversation. So if anybody has thoughts on how we can reinvigorate a more hopeful perspective in futures.
Who wants to take that one on?
I don't know if I will speak for myself. I don't know if I necessarily have a perception that there is a lack of a hopeful futures out there within at least the futurist community and, dare I say, systems thinking community. But I do think that, and Rose kind of mentioned this, I think we're all feeling the effects of the change that is oncoming. We know that the societies are changing. We know the world is changing. And I think we're all just really experiencing in real life how that unfolds. For some people, it might be the first time when they see structures break down and therefore mental models and worldviews break down. This is not my first time. I have lived through this before, and I'm not that old. And I actually, while that feels scary and maybe while that feels scary and not right, and there are a lot of things along the way that are not quite working out the way that I think we hoped for, I actually want to look beyond that horizon. And beyond that horizon, what I see is the decisions that we're making and helping to make in the next 10 years will probably set us for the next 200 or so years. And let's help make the right decisions. And that's for me where the hope comes in, because I think even in 10 years, we'll see a vastly different world. And if we do this right, it'll be hopefully a better world. We just have to kind of iron out the kinks that are happening at the moment. So I personally don't necessarily see this as and I don't see within the community that I talk to that we don't have enough hope. I think that we don't have enough action to act on that hope.
Nice. I do echo Anna's point about, Rose, to your other question. I know you have your hand up, you'll update your question, but to the point that there is precedence to going through upheaval. And I'm interested, I haven't lived through it myself, but I'm interested in understanding how previous people have managed through upheaval. And I think there's a role for foresight to retrieve some of those from the past or from a wider spectrum of other societies as well. But Rose, let's go back to you, and then we'll go back to Albert.
So I'm very encouraged by this discussion. Listening to the news. I live in Canada, like most of you, and it's very depressing. But I'm having more conversations with people that this will actually be a blessing in disguise for Canada and perhaps the rest of the world, because it's forcing us to not be complacent. And I think that's a big, we just want to be comfortable, most of us. And so this is really, and with folks like you who are in this space on a professional basis, I think it's really a turning point in even recognizing that things are not going to be the same. And you might be going through anxiety and being, this is not hopeful, but the more you talk to people, the more you discuss this, you can actually see, okay, there's a way I can navigate this so that it is actually better for me as an individual, my country, and the world. So I'm feeling that more than perhaps a couple of months ago.
Just to add quickly on the last two comments, for me, the best way to protect hope is to get closer to people who are doing brave and inspiring work. And I think there are a lot of people trying to change the world for a better future, and they tend to be in the underground or in the fringes or invisible. So I invite you to kind of find what is happening locally and just try to promote those people who are keeping the flame alive. I am part of a not-for-profit based in Europe who has been doing a project called What the Future. I'm going to share the link, but it's basically a website that is trying to cover future literacy, future-led initiative from around the globe, led by youth on the future of climate change. And what this platform is trying to do is just to promote, like the beam of hope happening. And there are a lot of them. It's just like they tend to be forgotten from the main media narratives. And I think we tend to just focus on, what is coming from the mainstream when there are actually a lot of interesting stuff happening. And that's for me like the best way to remain hopeful, like just keep closer and keep faith in possibility of more hopeful futures.
I love that. I love that relationship between the hope, Alberic, and as well as the local orientation, like the local, like who's in your contacts, who's around you, and Rose mentioning that as well. So it's a nice reinforcing point there. Zayon?
First, Rose, Alberic, I appreciate tremendously what both of you said. And I think part of the issue with hope here is I think for me, at least, is recognizing that sometimes, like Eileen, like you're saying, we're in the toughest part of an adaptive loop cycle. There are some days where it's just like, wow, this is terrible. But I think for me, it's like looking at long tail systems and history and recognizing how many social constructs our world and societies are built up on, from what we call things to our legislation and policy, and recognizing that from the flip side, while one rogue actor can come and dismantle decades of policy, legislation, and laws, that maybe from the flip side, a rogue actor can come and build something positive and inspirational and genuine in that way. And I think I look at it like, if you look at complex biological systems, right? Like if you're stuck with an alligator, I say this example, like if you're stuck with an alligator and you recognize that alligator, those systems aren't working for you. Forget inherently good or bad or anything there. Forget value judgments, but this alligator is not working for you. Maybe science will catch up to the point that you can convert that alligator into a golden retriever. But sometimes it might just be easier to go out and find a place to get yourself acquainted with the golden retriever. And sometimes I think the hope is that we can come together and build new systems that can displace some of the negativity, or at least create insulations or buffers. I don't know. It'll take me a lot longer than a couple of minutes to go into the thoughts, but I feel that there are ways for us to come together as people and move forward. There's a lot more good in history than bad, I think, and a lot more examples of humanity doing good than bad, even though sometimes the bad can overwhelm.
In Zayon, on the point of social constructs of policy, for example, the flip side of what you're saying, of the third side of it, I'm making a three-dimensional cube, is that there might be healthy reckonings with realizing the feebleness of some of these.
Oh, absolutely. Some of our systems
coming
are
to terms with that.
Yeah. There are, and I think recognizing that some of our systems are not working properly, and recognizing too that there are some that were designed to work in ways that don't function equitably, that actually disadvantage people, that operate from very zero-sum places that aren't always rooted in logic or morality. Yeah, a lot, Sana. Yeah.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you, Zayon. Elena?
I was wondering how much any of these touched on legislation. that is trying to basically, I think, probably catch up, never mind keep up, with the changes, particularly in technology. Just before I logged on to this meeting, I was watching the BBC Context, and they were talking about legislation being introduced in Britain to control people's ability to control the images of them that are put up on the internet by Grok. And Musk is saying, it's censorship. And other people are saying, what do you mean? It's like child pornography. uh, anyway, I just wondered how much legislation was touched upon.
Certainly in the jailbreaking play shop, legislation was a central explicit theme.
At the Future Forum, legislation came up a fair bit. But I think because it's international, I think that complexity is also interesting, seeing like how legislation in an open system of a globalized world, that even if one country has implemented laws around one thing, if you're working in open trade system, how do you ensure that that logic spreads with your trading partners, even, let alone people who aren't your partners or even your enemies?
So maybe the second version of a plugin, Anna. We plugged in the Canadian Foresight Network. Now we get to plug in the value of the WhatsApp chat that people can enjoy. So Anna can respond to Elena's question about a discussion this chat was having. I don't know if it's like private, but maybe you could just say in general terms, Anna, what we're talking about.
Oh, I don't know if I'm going to do the justice to this conversation. So feel free to jump in because you're part of it. But exactly to that point, I think we were talking about that in the US, we've seen a lot of bans, like you've mentioned, the one in the UK. There was recently also a ban for social media in Australia. And I think Canada is kind of looking how that legislation could work. And I think if I summarize this well, our general notion is that while this might be an interesting mini step, it seems to be really in this particular instance, this version of legislation, it seems to be an intervention that appeases the political need for the parties versus actually fixing the root cause and the problem of some of the things that we're seeing coming up, like children spending too much time on social media. I think there was one that we talked about junk food being advertised, and that we're actually not addressing the core causes of why that's happening. And so banning and putting legislation through is just not going to fundamentally fix the things that need to be fixing to fix the problem. I think that's very not eloquently put where the conversation ended. And I feel like we're pretty unanimous in that thinking, no? Like I think that's kind of where we ended up. So
I think the answer is, Elena, yes, legislation comes up often in foresight conversations, partly because it's often maybe a knee-jerk reaction by many of those who have those degrees of control. But where foresight can play a role and systems is to bring people. I really like the last part of this conversation is about getting more localized with how you're dealing and wrestling with the experiences and how they're manifesting locally, and also having working in the social arena that's my opinion. This is my subjective Zaid opinion, that working in the social arena can often have stronger weight than, going just to a legal or technical ruling to negotiate how to work through society. And I think there's a lot of value in retrieving that in the midst of upheaval, if that's fair for me to say as kind of a synthesis of a lot of the conversation this evening. Cool. Roberto, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I did. I just wanted to say, building off of Aileen's point, legislation was talked about a lot in terms of like policy that embeds, to use Corey's term, enshittification. It embeds and empowers tech enshittification. So one of the examples is he often talks about how there is no insurance, for example. You can't really sue a tech company for faulty code. There's no standard for that. So instead of regulating, this was a big topic of conversation in the workshop, which is the moment you regulate something is the moment you give it legitimacy. So people stop worrying about it. People stop thinking about it in an active terms. And I think where we ended up discussing is that foresight and systems thinking can start thinking about how we can, when we should regulate and how we should regulate. Specifically, is it better to regulate software with standards like we do with other engineering, and have that incentive and motive to be good, or in this case, do we regulate against harm? In the case of like Grok. So, but if software engineering was, not incentivized, it was actually had insurance, or we were able to sue them for dealing us crappy code, then maybe we would have a better internet. That was his example. And in terms of other legislative examples, like DFF was talking about how intergenerational fairness is an EU priority. But everyone on the panel is like, well, we can't tell you exactly how intergenerational fairness is going to work out or play out in your specific locality. So they were pushing it as like, this is your mandate. You have to figure it out what that means for your locality. And then to Zad's point, that's why it was pushed down to the local level. Municipalities are trying to deal with it, but also individual countries are trying to deal with it and figure out exactly what that means and deal with it at a local level.
Awesome. Thanks everyone. I do recognize, we run to like 8:15, but if we're online, we kind of go over, and I think that's okay. But I don't want to take people away from the rest of their evenings or nights. So thank you everyone for such a wonderful discussion. Anna, Aileen, Roberto, Zayan, everyone that was on previously as well. Thank you for that. Next month, David Ng will be hosting. I think he has something in mind. He wasn't able to attend this month. I won't be on. And then we may, return back to periodical in-person sessions as well. So yeah, love the Shareback. I love the crossover between foresight and systems. More to chat about, Anna, between us, between others. And go check out the Canadian Foresight Network and some of the links as well that were posted. Okay. Thanks everyone for joining. Hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for hosting.
Take care, everyone. Bye.
Cheers.
Thanks.